Hey guys, it's Erica here from Big Cat Creative, and today we're going to dive into the main differences between Squarespace's Classic Editor and their new Fluid Engine Editor. So if you don't know already, Squarespace just released a new content editing experience for Squarespace 7.1 called Fluid Engine. Fluid Engine will be the new on-page editor for sections that use blocks. So if you've used Squarespace before, you probably have experience using the Classic Editor. And it seems that Fluid Engine is set to eventually completely replace the Classic Editor altogether. Now we have another video and post all about the Fluid Engine, more about the details of how to access it in Squarespace, if you should use it, how you can continue using the Classic Editor if you would prefer that. This video, however, is going to be more about the direct differences between the Classic Editor and the Fluid Engine. And I'm going to jump on my computer and show you the side-by-side differences between the two, which will help you get a much better understanding of how it works and if you'd like to upgrade your pages to this new editor. So let's dive in. Okay, so let's dive into the biggest differences between the Classic Editor and the new Fluid Engine Editor. So while this is a really big change for Squarespace, if you're already using Squarespace 7.1, you'll actually notice that the majority of things are the same. So all of your pages, all of your design, site styles, how your collection pages work, pretty much the only thing that has changed is the on-page editing when you're using a regular section. So let me show you on the page, because that's really the only place that you're gonna see major differences. So I'm a Squarespace Circle member, and that means at this point, really early stages, I still have the ability to add Classic Editor sections and Fluid Engine sections, so I can easily show you the difference here. I think this is probably available for most people at this point, but it probably will change, so I'm not going to tell you that it's going to be easy for you to access both types of sections, as I do believe that Squarespace is planning to eventually replace the Classic Editor with the Fluid Engine totally. I don't believe they're going to keep the ability to continue to add both. What I can tell you though, and I'm pretty confident they will keep this, is that none of your existing Classic Editor sections are going to break. They will have this little upgrade button over them, so you can upgrade them to a Fluid Engine section, which I'll show you in a second. And you should still be able to continue to duplicate your Classic Editor sections and duplicate pages that use Classic Editor, and they shouldn't upgrade on their own. They really should only upgrade to Fluid Engine when you click that button. So if you're worried about any of your Classic Editor site breaking, I wouldn't worry about it. The only thing that you do need to be really careful of is if you do click that upgrade button, being very sure that that's something that you want to do, maybe making a backup of your page or maybe making a backup of your section before you do that, because you can't convert it back to Classic Editor. You can change your Classic Editor sections to Fluid Engine, but it doesn't work the other way around. So just be really careful with this button here, because you don't want to accidentally convert a section and not have it work the way it originally worked. Okay, so now let's really dive into the big differences. So I mentioned earlier, it just affects regular page sections. So when you add a section, Squarespace gives you all of these different options, and the majority of these options are just different layouts with different blocks rearranged in different ways. But it is important to note that there are a couple of different types of sections. So we have list sections, which are not regular block-based sections. I have a whole video talking about list sections and gallery sections and how you can create testimonial sliders with them. You can see how the sections look here. So this is just examples of what you can do with a list section. So it's just like a really tidy way to add, manage, and display content in a section. You could create a lot of these layouts with blocks, for example, like this one, but you could just use a list section if you want to. It might be faster. And then they also have these nice sort of carousel style slideshow sections with little arrows and cards with images and text, which are definitely harder to achieve with blocks. Anyway, I have a whole other video about list sections, and these aren't affected at all. So these sections still work exactly as they did before. And same thing with the gallery sections. So galleries are just ways of displaying images. You could do slideshows, carousels, grids, and these also aren't affected at all. So the only sections we're talking about is just the blank sections or just the regular sections that use blocks. And I do imagine that if you have used Squarespace before, you're very familiar with the sections that use blocks, because that's kind of how we build the majority of sites, using the block system. So this is a classic editor section right now. There's a text block on here. I can click to add an image block. So just added an image. And then to position things around this section, you'd probably be using quite a lot of spacer blocks. So you could click and drag elements and they sort of snap into place, and you can pull them around. I could add some text down here. So if you're familiar with Classic Editor, this is what you're used to. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this same section that I just created. So I'm going to have two of the same sections, and you'll see that when I duplicate it, it stays in Classic Editor, which is really good. And I'm going to click Upgrade and show you the difference of these two sections. So immediately you can see that things moved slightly. It's not the exact alignment as it was. So when you click Upgrade, you are going to see that some things shift around a little bit, because the grid-based structure of Fluid Engine is quite a bit different than Classic Editor. Originally on Classic Editor, you're working within 12 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we're in the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So it was a nice even 12 column grid. Now if we come down to Fluid Engine, I'm going to click on the G key, which is going to reveal the grid that we're working on, which is a good tip if you're designing in Fluid Engine. Now you're going to see we're working not just within columns, but we're working in a full grid. And this actually has 24 columns. The rows are totally adjustable depending on how many you want per section, but at this point, the grid stays at 24 columns. So I think the biggest difference here is that not only are there more columns and you can be a bit more flexible with your horizontal positioning, but also you're using the rows as well. So you have this vertical positioning that you can play around with. So again, to make that grid show up and hide, you'll just want to press the G button on your keyboard. So because now we can adjust vertically on all of our blocks, that requires some new settings within the blocks. So for something simple like text, you'll notice when you click on the text box, there is a vertical alignment. So for example, I could have this container stretched out vertically like it is here, and then I could change the alignment to the center or the bottom or the top. So depending on what you're trying to do with this text, it does give you more options for alignment and adjusting where things are positioned. So you'll notice that all blocks, once you click on them one time, have this alignment setting, which will align the block within whatever container you set. So I refer to this as the container. I'm not really sure what we're calling it, but I would say this is the content within the block and this is the block container, and you can adjust this depending on the grid. So along with those alignment settings, which are very necessary with this new grid, we're also going to see a few other key settings, one in particular within image blocks. If I double click on image, or if I click the edit, it's going to open up the image block settings. And if you click on design, you're going to see these new settings here, which are fit or fill. So fit essentially means that it's keeping the same ratio as whatever image you uploaded. So if I click out and I play around with the size of this container, you'll see the image just stays the same ratio no matter what. The image never gets cropped, and it just stretches to whatever alignment you've given it within that container. So here I could play around with that alignment again, up, bottom, center, and if I dragged this container to be more horizontal, you'll see then that's when the horizontal alignment kicks in. So those alignment settings are very useful if you've set your image to fit. So you'd want to do this if you have like a graphic that you don't want to get cropped, or an image you don't want cropped, and you really want to retain that ratio of the image. Then come on over to fill, and you can see in this case the image is going to fill up whatever you've set that block container to. So whatever you adjust this to on the grid, the image is just going to fill that container right up. And this will actually adjust depending on screen size too. So as the grid adjusts, the image will adjust slightly to adapt to different screen sizes. So that's fit or fill on your image blocks. Now we have a very similar setting with button blocks. So let me click add block up here in the top left, add a button. I'm going to drag it down here just so we can see it. And I'll actually add 2 buttons so that we have 2 to compare to. So you can see here we have 2 buttons in the grid, and I'm going to double click or click on the settings, click on design, and you're going to see the same fit and fill options. So I'm going to change this one to fit, and this one will automatically be set to fill. So the differences here is that this first one that is set to fit, that is going to use the exact padding and sizing settings that you set up in your design site styles when you worked on your buttons. So in your design site styles, you can add the settings for your primary, secondary, and tertiary buttons. And if you set your button to fit, it's going to retain those exact settings no matter the size I make the container. So you can see the button is very consistent. It's just adjusting to where the container is, but it's holding its exact shape. Now, if we're using the fill button, this button is going to fill wherever you adjust the container to. So similarly to the fill image, you'll see as I adjust the container, the button just spans the whole container, and it actually doesn't use any of the padding settings that you set up in your site styles. So both of these are pretty cool. It just really depends what you want to do with that button and how you want it to look. So there might be some other blocks in the future or that I haven't even discovered yet that have fit or fill options, but these are really the 2 most common blocks that I think people use that are quite different now because of those 2 settings. So it's really something that I wanted to touch on in this video because I think it's a very big difference than what you would get in the Classic Editor. So we've talked about how all blocks have that extra alignment setting. Some blocks have the fit and the fill setting, which is really cool. Another Fluid Engine setting that you will see is the move forward or move backward. So this one is really important because now within Fluid Engine, you can actually overlap items, which is so cool. And something that we were never able to do before in Squarespace. And it opens up a huge range of different designs that we can create. But of course, when we start overlapping things, we do need to be really careful that it looks good on desktop and mobile. And of course, we need to make sure that things are stacked in the right order. So as soon as you overlap something on the grid, if you click into it, you're going to see another setting here in this little bar that says move backward or move forward. So if I click move backward, it's going to send it behind the image. And then I'll click move forward again and it's going to bring it to the front. So that is a new setting that's very Fluid Engine specific because it only relates to blocks overlapping, which is something brand new within the Fluid Engine. So along with this huge change for these block sections, we're going to of course see new section settings. So generally within the Classic Editor, when we clicked on our section settings, we had some simple alignment settings, the background settings, and the color settings. Now if we go to our Fluid Engine section, click Edit Section, and you're going to see a different settings panel. So this is expected considering this section is very different now. And honestly, I don't think you have to worry about this too much. It looks kind of crazy, like there's way more settings in it, but actually it's pretty simple. So the first thing is row count. So if I click into row count and just increase the number using my keyboard, you'll see that it's actually going to increase the number of rows. So that is a really simple feature. It won't let you remove rows if there's content there. And if I click out of the settings, I can also just add the rows by dragging this little slider here. So 2 ways to do the same thing. It's just tells you how many rows you have and you can adjust it if you want to. You can play around with the grid gap settings, which is quite cool. So the only reason that I would really ever do this is if, say, I was trying to have 2 images directly next to each other with no gap, or alternatively, maybe I was trying to have 2 elements next to each other with a much larger gap than the one that's already there, then I would increase the gap between the grids. So this will increase or decrease the space between your blocks. And generally, you probably won't use it that much, to be honest, but it is there, which is pretty cool. Now we have this section down the bottom that says fill screen. And these settings at the bottom are actually really similar to these classic editor sections that we were just looking at. So height, width, and alignment. So if I turn off fit screen, it's going to have the grid go all the way to the top and bottom of the section, and there's no padding. But if I turn back on fit screen, we're going to get those padding settings. So I can choose the small, medium, or large height, which is very similar to what we could do in the classic editor. And it's just going to add extra padding to the section. So really, you can play around with this, and it depends what you're trying to do with your section. If you're trying to have a section with no padding, you would just turn that off, and you would drag your image to the top, or your blocks to the top, and decrease those rows, and now you have no padding. Similarly, in every section, and this isn't setting dependent, you can drag any blocks all the way out to the outer edge. So this is really cool if you want to create a full image within this section. It spans top to bottom and all the way to the edge without any gap. So this really isn't to do with the settings, because this part is possible in all of the sections. So that's sort of the new alignment and padding settings for the section. It looks like a lot more settings, but really it's not. And the background and color settings are exactly the same. So definitely jump in and start playing around with the grid. The final thing that I want to talk to you about, which is probably the biggest difference between Classic Editor and Fluid Engine, is the unique and independent editing for mobile. So let me show you. We've got this weird design in this section here. And if I come up to the mobile view, you're going to notice that the section looks a lot different on mobile, and we can actually edit within this view. So this is very exciting, because the way Classic Editor is for mobile is that it automatically adapts and stacks everything in the order that it is on the page, basically. And while that does make things really easy, I would say that the control over mobile was very limited, because you had no editing capabilities for mobile. You couldn't change it natively in Squarespace. So that was pretty frustrating. Now they've done a whole 180 on us, and the mobile positioning is completely separate from desktop, which is amazing. But of course, for some people, they might see this as a lot more work, because you do have to go in and you do have to reposition everything and make sure everything looks good on mobile. But honestly, I kind of think you had to do that anyway on Squarespace, and you should be doing that anyway. So for me, I think this is a huge improvement. So many people are using mobile these days, and I think the older Squarespace mobile standard adaptation was just not cutting it for how many people are using mobile to view websites. So while this is a little bit of extra work, all of the blocks that you've used within the section should be there, and then you can adjust, and you don't have to get too creative with this either. If you just wanted to make it nice and simple and just stacked kind of like how it would be originally, that's totally fine too. You don't have to do anything too crazy, but it is important that you go in there and you adjust and check that everything looks good. The cool thing is that if you do want to do something crazy, you can. You can completely rearrange the way everything looks on mobile compared to desktop. You don't have to stick with the basic stacked layout like you did in the past. Obviously, this looks really bad, okay? But I'm just showing you for an example. Now, there are a few things that do copy over from desktop to mobile. For example, text alignment. So if this text is left aligned, it's going to be left aligned on mobile. And if you change it, it will affect both desktop and mobile. And there are a few little funny things like that that hopefully Squarespace will fix. So you can change the alignment of your text, or you can maybe hide and show blocks on desktop versus mobile, or vice versa. But where you move things within the grid, how you change their containers, and also your row count. So if I click edit section and look at my row count, this can be different than desktop too. So there's a huge opportunity there to make your mobile site look as incredible as your desktop site, and that's very, very exciting, and I think this is really a huge step up for Squarespace. Okay, so finally, let's quickly talk about some of the stuff that is missing. Now, there are quite a few things missing from the Fluid Engine, and for good reason. For example, spacer blocks, because we don't need them. But there are a few things missing that we are all crossing our fingers that Squarespace will bring back. And the two biggest things, in my opinion, are image block layouts and image block animations. So if we come up to Classic Editor and we double click on our image to open the settings, if we come into design, you may not have used these before, but if you have used these image block layouts, you're going to know how user-friendly they were and how easy it was to create these cool layouts on your site without having to build it all from scratch or with code. So lots of cool opportunities there to create layouts without having to actually build from the ground up. And generally these image block layouts, you can adjust the settings for them within your site styles. So they are site-wide designs, so it was nice to have that consistency throughout your site, and it was really easy to use them. Unfortunately, Squarespace has scrapped these. I guess they believe because this is so flexible and you can create all of those image block layouts by using the grid that maybe we didn't need or want them. But I do think that even though you can achieve most of those layouts on Fluid Engine, it's a lot slower to do it from scratch. So I would love to see those image block backs, and I think a lot of people would feel the same. And then the second thing that I'm missing dearly is the individual image block animations. So under design of an image block, you could actually animate your individual images to load on the page with a cool animation. And for some reason, they have scrapped this also from Fluid Engine. I'm hoping it's a mistake and they're planning to bring it back. There's definitely some other things missing from Fluid Engine, and there's definitely some things maybe lacking that they need to work on, or maybe that is a little bit glitchy, but that's pretty standard when Squarespace releases something brand new. When they launch it to the public, then they have the feedback and the resources to really put all of their effort into it and fix all the things that need fixing. I'd love to know what you think about Fluid Engine in the comments compared to Classic Editor. Are you planning to switch over your sections, or are you planning to just stick with what you've got? If you do have an existing Classic Editor site, I can imagine that using a mix of Classic Editor and Fluid Engine sections would really give you all of the different options. So let me know in the comments what you think, and if there's anything that you really hate about it or that's missing that I missed in this video, I'd love to know. Let's chat about it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.